The biggest betting scandal in mixed martial arts history is happening in front of us and being debunked directly in front of us in real time. More on that just got released and we will discuss it. But first, I'm going to give you my top 5 UFC super fights that need to happen in 2026. Covering every single one of these right now on this episode. Good morning and welcome to the matchup with mmadbm. Appreciate you guys all for being here as per usual. And we have so much to talk about regarding this UFC betting scandal. And that will be the second half of this episode. But I need to talk to you guys about quickly the top 5 best UFC super fights that we could put on in 2026. And let me tell you, 2026 for the UFC is UFC Super Fight Central. That is exactly where we're going to be. Let's talk about the top 5 potential super fights. Now, there are going to be some fights that are mixing in divisions, some fighters moving up in weight, some fighters coming out of retirement. We have some major fights to make, especially in the wake of this White House card and it coming closer and closer to the period in which Dana White and the UFC have talked about making these fights, which is around February 2026. And let me tell you guys my top 5 UFC super fights to make in 2026. At number 1, constantly teased, is flyweight champion Alexandre Pantoja moving up to fight Merab Dvalishvili. Now, I do understand that Tatsuro Taira is there and he's going to be fighting Brandon Moreno soon. That's a very intriguing matchup that we have for Pantoja. Also, Pantoja fighting Joshua Van in December is also a very interesting conversation. Very interesting fight stylistically. But I think everybody believes that Pantoja is going to be getting Joshua Van's back and submitting him, including myself. If Pantoja gets past Joshua Van and Merab Dvalishvili gets past Peter Yan, Merab and Pantoja fighting on the same card on December 6th at the end of the year in 2025 could set up a beautiful fight for them, considering there is no current contender right now that sticks out for Merab that he has not beaten. Sean O'Malley, he's beaten twice. Peter Yan would have beaten twice. Umar Nurmagomedov, not the most impressive win over Mario Bautista, needs another one. Already probably needed another one regardless. Trying to think of any other contenders. Song Yadong, not really there. If he beats Sean O'Malley, maybe. Corey Sandhagen just lost to Merab. Nothing for Merab is available at 135 pounds right now. Considering his activity and absolute dominance throughout the entire division, I think him versus Pantoja is a perfect fight. Also considering that Merab has stated that he does not want to go up to 145 pounds to fight for the title. Because one, his friend Aljamain Sterling is on a good win streak and he's close to a title shot at 145 pounds. And he wants Aljo to be able to get that. And two, he does not want to fight Volkanovski. He loves and respects him way too much. That's something Merab doesn't want to put aside. You know Merab will never put that aside. He refused to fight for the bantamweight title against Aljamain Sterling. He's not going to go up in weight to screw Aljamain of an opportunity or to go against his word about Volkanovski. So Merab's going to stick at 135 for the time being. He's 34 years old, probably going on 35 relatively soon. And Alexandre Pantoja, I believe, is 35 years old with another impressive win over Joshua Van. It's a perfect fight to make. That Pantoja said he didn't necessarily want to fight Merab, and he wanted to stick out with this division and beat Demetrius Johnson's record and stick to this flyweight dominance, which he still has some pretty decent blood, fresh blood to go ahead and compete against. Tatsuro Taira, in my opinion, will beat Brandon Moreno, so we'll have that fight to go up. Manel Kape also fighting Brandon Royval. It's another guy that Pantoja has not fought. Well, he did fight actually much earlier in their careers, which Pantoja won. But now we get to have Pantoja versus Manel Kape 2, if that's a possibility. But why not do Pantoja versus Merab? Why not reward two of your most active, dominant champions in the UFC today? In guys who, in my opinion, were two of the most disrespected champions, now two of the most respected champions in Pantoja and Merab. Two of the most beloved champions because of their dominance, because of their fighting styles and persistence in the grappling and domination in that grappling. Who doesn't love Merab and Pantoja right now, unless you're a Sean O'Malley fan, right? I think Alexandre Pantoja versus Merab Dvalishvili is a beautiful fight to make, and I do think Merab will destroy him. I think it's a very bad fight for Pantoja, but I think it's a sick fight to have. I think it's a beautiful fight in terms of hype, and I think it's one of the 5 super fights we can make in 2026 that is very, very likely. Number 2, this is, in my opinion, the least likely fight of the 5 that I have listed, but I don't think it's completely out of the question. Khamzat Chimaev versus Yuri Prochazka. Now, this could occur at either 185 pounds or 205 pounds. Yuri Prochazka has now teased not once, but twice at approaching 185 pounds instead of sticking at 205 pounds at light heavyweight. He has teased the middleweight move again, I think if not today, then yesterday or the day before, saying that 205 pounds is an easy cut for him. 185 pounds would be a challenge, and he's certain that he can accomplish it. And right now, middleweight is very, very timid. There is really nobody that you could think of that can compete against Chimaev. And I don't necessarily think Yuri Prochazka would beat Chimaev, but I think he gives him a better fight than Nasruddin Imavov does. I think he gives him a better fight than Dricus du Plessis did. I think he gives him a much better fight than anybody right now at middleweight. RDR, Brendan Allen, Fluffy Hernandez. Yes, Fluffy Hernandez included. And how entertaining is Khamzat Chimaev versus Yuri Prochazka? How fun is that fight? Why would you not want to see that fight as an MMA fan? I hate this concept of, oh, we need to get the middleweight division going, or we need to not hold these divisions. If we have a super fight, a huge fight between two gigantic stars and or superstars, or one that involves a superstar in the UFC, that we have an opportunity to make that makes any sort of sense, we need to capitalize on these fights. Because no matter how much complaining we want to do about the structure of it and the structure of the division, guess what? It is infinitely more entertaining by the time we get to fight week. The build up towards it, the anticipation for these fights. We want to see Khamzat Chimaev versus Yuri Prochazka. We want to see these big fights. If we can get that at 205 with Chimaev becoming a two-division champion, as we expect Alex Pereira to leave light heavyweight, and Yuri Prochazka, in my opinion, would beat Carlos Ulrich to become champion. Or we can get Yuri Prochazka coming down to 185 pounds, and then he fights against Khamzat Chimaev. Maybe he fights a contender at 185, earns that title shot, and goes right into it. I mean, I think if Yuri Prochazka goes to 185 pounds, he's one fight away from the title shot. And I think Chimaev versus Yuri Prochazka is one of the most entertaining fights you can imagine. We've seen Yuri Prochazka break fighters down the line. We want to see if he can stop a takedown from Chimaev. I don't necessarily believe he can, but I think he can punish Chimaev every now and then. In my opinion, I do think Chimaev completely decimates him, but it's a sick fight stylistically. It's a very entertaining fight to watch, and think of a more entertaining fight that you would rather see at 185 or 205 pounds. They're two divisions without any big fights that we are anticipating right now. No fight is higher anticipated at 185 or 205 pounds than Khamzat Chimaev versus Yuri Prochazka would be at either weight class, especially with Alex Pereira more than likely departing from 205 pounds. Make this fight happen. We're a lot closer to that than we think we are at 205 or 185 pounds. 2026 Chimaev versus Yuri Prochazka. Now, number 3, Alex Pereira moves up to heavyweight, not to fight Tom Aspinall, because we've clearly seen the star power in that completely go down. Alex Pereira versus John Jones. No title on the line. Maybe you do a heavyweight BMF to make it look much more important, I guess. I don't know. Alex Pereira is worthy of a BMF title. John Jones, wouldn't necessarily qualify, in my opinion. But nonetheless, Alex Pereira at heavyweight makes a lot of sense against John Jones because stylistically it's a very binary matchup. John Jones gets him down or Pereira knocks his head off. However, John Jones' durability has looked fantastic throughout his career. However, in my opinion, if you go look at his fight against Stipe Miocic, he looked slower than he's ever been in his career. It looked as sluggish as it was. Reaction time was horrible. Maybe he was tailoring it to Stipe Miocic, wasn't really threatened by the presence of Stipe. But Stipe was landing pretty proactively on him, and Alex Pereira is a lot quicker, a lot more aggressive. And I think Pereira will probably try to put Jones on the back foot. At the same time, it is John Jones. When have you really seen many people put Jones on the back foot? Apart from like Daniel Cormier or a couple other fighters. Especially recently now, we saw Cyril Gane not even be able to put Jones on the back foot. Cyril Gane was very timid. Lights too bright. But are the lights really ever going to be too bright for Alex Pereira? Stylistically, I think it's an insane matchup. I also think it's a single leg away from disaster for Alex Pereira as John Jones gets on top of him. And it would look like a grizzly bear on top of a dolphin. But nonetheless, I do think that Jones would smother Pereira. I think it would be a sick fight. I think it would be one of the more highly anticipated fights you could have in MMA history, just considering the amount Alex Pereira has accomplished at 2 separate weight classes and the names he's beaten and how he's beaten them with how active he has been, and also becoming champion again at 38 years old against a prime Magomed Ankalaev. That's a guy who's only lost one time in his career, and it was a last-second submission in a fight in which he had won every other second of against Paul Craig. It is an unbelievable feat for Alex Pereira to accomplish what he has in mixed martial arts with limited mixed martial arts experience and beating the fighters he has and finishing the fighters he has with the finishing streaks, with the 2-division championship status, and going up to fight for not necessarily 3-division championship status, but John Jones vacated the heavyweight title. John Jones is the greatest of all time. It's massive GOAT status for Alex Pereira if he were to beat John Jones. And if John Jones beats Alex Pereira, it's just another thing you could add to his resume that he could probably ego run through. And it's a sick fight that he wants, and he wants a fight in the White House. Alex Pereira's been calling for this fight in the White House. I think it's a very good fight to make overall between the two. And why not? I think it's the most why not fight you could have in MMA right now. John Jones, Alex Pereira. You have a big card in the White House card. If any card is meant for a fight like this, if this fight is meant for any card, it's a match made in heaven. White House card, Alex Pereira, John Jones. Book it. At number 4, probably the most highly anticipated fight for the longest period of time amongst all of these, because we've just been waiting and waiting and waiting for this fight to happen. It was officially booked at one point, got scrapped a month prior. Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Conor McGregor seems to be in a better place now. He seems to be a little bit more fit, seems to have a little bit more mental clarity than he's had in the past couple of years. And he was booked to fight Michael Chandler, I believe, 2024 in July, about last year or so in July. June or July, if I'm not wrong. And he ended up pulling out because of a pinky toe injury, and a lot happened with Conor outside the cage at that point. Conor's life went into a spiral, and now Conor McGregor's back, allegedly. And he's super adamant about this fight at the White House. Another White House fight. And Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler is one that we've been waiting on for a while. Ever since The Ultimate Fighter came upon, with them two being the coaches, we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for this matchup. And honestly, at this point, at the time the fight was supposed to be made, it was Conor McGregor trying to re-enter contendership at lightweight, see if he was going to continue to push forward, maybe another shot at the title. It is nowhere near the same at this point. Even in 2024 when the fight was booked, not even anywhere near comparable to any potential of where that fight would have put Conor in contendership when the Ultimate Fighter show was being scheduled and how the fight was supposed to be directly after it. We weren't even expecting Conor to be a contender last year if he beat Michael Chandler. But at the same time, Michael Chandler's place in the division was a lot higher last year. So you never know. Now, it's just more about Conor McGregor coming back. And it's a stylistically advantageous matchup just considering McGregor's style. But Michael Chandler's going to bring a fight. He's explosive. He's going to be swinging, and McGregor's probably going to get hit early. Can McGregor hold on early? It's been a while since McGregor has fought. How's his durability? How is he in the octagon? How are his reflexes? How are his reactions? Has he been sparring at all? Has the time off alongside the mental deterioration of Conor McGregor, maybe honestly it's coming back up, and his mental health and his psyche and everything related to his performance mentally is going to be fine now, but to what extent can it be fine after the damage it has taken? Especially with the lack of physical competition, especially with the lack of experience in the last 4 or so years. But it's Conor McGregor. It's the biggest superstar in the history of mixed martial arts. It's one of the biggest superstars in the history of sports. This is the Renaissance man of the UFC. This is the man who basically established the UFC as what it is today. Yes, there was Chuck Liddell, Ronda Rousey. You have the establishments. You have the Four Horsemen, the Mount Rushmore of the influence of the UFC, the big uprisers of the UFC. But Conor McGregor is the guy. You think the UFC, you think Conor McGregor. That is the one guy everybody is unanimously understood built the UFC brick by brick. And in my opinion, if there's anybody ever that is bigger than the UFC company itself, other than Dana White, it is Conor McGregor. It's as simple as that. Conor McGregor is the only fighter bigger than the company. You have the Michael Chandler fight set in stone for God knows how long now. It still makes sense. Michael Chandler is still one of the more action-packed fighters in UFC history, as you're always going to get a fun fight out of Michael Chandler. Why not put him in with Conor McGregor? Why not put it on the White House card? Everybody is anticipating a Conor McGregor return. Conor McGregor has been as adamant about it as you can ever get. Dana White seems a little bit more optimistic about this one than he has in previous Conor McGregor announcements. Even when he announced and the Conor McGregor Michael Chandler fight was actually official and was supposed to actually happen, like the fight was booked, they were selling tickets. Dana White seems a little bit more confident now about a Conor McGregor return than even back then. But with number 5, the final and, in my opinion, biggest super fight the UFC can make in 2026, the one I have talked about the most, I believe just talked about it on the last episode of this show, and I feel like we've been talking about it for, I would like to say like almost half a year now, is Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. Whether it's at 155 pounds or 170 pounds, but more than likely 170 pounds because the stakes are even higher. Again, just to reiterate what I've said about this fight over and over and over again, Ilia Topuria could become the first ever 3-division champion in UFC history with the most insane resume accumulated throughout that. In my opinion, the toughest schedule to become a 2-division champion in knocking out Alexander Volkanovski right after having to knock out Max Holloway, but just the title fights themselves, knocking out Volkanovski and knocking out Charles Oliveira. Whether people want to criticize him for beating these guys outside of their prime, one, that's not Topuria's fault, and two, Volkanovski became champion directly after. Charles Oliveira disposed of Mateusz Gamrot like he was an amateur directly after. Even if you want to include the Max Holloway fight, Holloway 3-fight win streak against top featherweights, and then Justin Gaethje, literally the top contender in lightweight at the time, gets knocked out by Topuria for the first time in his career, knocked out. And then you go and he beats Dustin Poirier to a pulp. Explain to me how this is not the most impressive 3-fight win streak in UFC history. The most impressive 2-division champion accomplishment in UFC history as an undefeated fighter. And then he'd be going on to face, if Islam Makhachev beats Jack Della Maddalena, he'd be going on to face the guy tied with Anderson Silva for the longest win streak in UFC history. After beating Jack Della Maddalena, would have 10 to 11 finishes across that 16-fight win streak, a much more impressive resume than Anderson Silva with a much more impressive level of competition that he beat with the performances against them. On top of that, Makhachev would be a 2-division champion, something Silva would not be. In my opinion, Islam Makhachev is the greatest UFC fighter of all time if he beats Jack Della Maddalena and becomes welterweight champion. Now imagine he beats Ilia Topuria and has the longest win streak in UFC history. You cannot argue whether or not he's the greatest of all time, even if it were to be at 170 pounds. And then you have Ilia Topuria with the option and the opportunity of becoming the first ever 3-division UFC champion in history. This is the biggest fight historically the UFC can make in terms of MMA history, UFC history, the caliber of superstardom between the two fighters in their primes. It is, in my opinion, labeled the perfect MMA fight. And that could happen in 2026. It could have happened in 2025, yet it's even more perfect to happen in 2026. And what better card for it to happen than the White House card? The last 3 fights that I mentioned, Ilia Topuria, Makhachev, McGregor, Chandler, Pereira, Jones, all 3 could be happening on the UFC White House card. Which one would be the main event? In my opinion, obviously should be Topuria, Makhachev. In my opinion, also in that order, should be Topuria, Makhachev, then co-main McGregor, Chandler, then featured fight Pereira, Jones. But UFC have a lot to figure out with that. But those 5 super fights need to be made in 2026. Pantoja versus Merab for the bantamweight title. Chimaev versus Prohaska for either 185 or 205 title. Alex Pereira versus John Jones for either the BMF heavyweight title or just nothing at that point. McGregor versus Chandler. Conor McGregor fight. Simple as that. And Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. Greatest of all time status and history to be made from either guy. Either the longest win streak alone for Makhachev in UFC history at 17, or Ilia Topuria becomes the first ever 3-division UFC champion and would be undefeated doing so. UFC need to book these. I think it's as simple as that. I don't really see how they could botch it. And I feel like at the bare minimum, 3 to 4 of these are in their palms. Even the Chimaev Yuri fight is right there. But now let's head on to the UFC betting scandal. We talked a little bit about the Isaac Dulgarian fight that we had, where we actually predicted that Yair Dalvai, in one of our top 5 predictions for the week, the Fab 5, that Yair Dalvai would finish Isaac Dulgarian. He ended up doing so. However, we obviously saw that there was a very interesting line movement on that Saturday during the fights, and a lot was noted to the UFC, and they still let the fight go on. A lot of money was coming in on Yair Dalvai, and not necessarily any significant money coming in against him. And then Isaac Dulgarian gets finished in the first round. And now we have some more news on this scandal. Isaac Dulgarian's purse was withheld by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, meaning he did not get paid for that fight amongst this betting scandal. Not only did the UFC not re-sign him because it was his last fight of his contract, his pay was withheld by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. And Ariel Helwani started listing a couple of things right now, said that a lot of UFC fighters have been offered, anonymously to Ariel Helwani, they stated this to him, have been offered to fix a fight, to lose a fight, to throw a fight, with a certain amount of money involved. The incentive makes sense for a lot of UFC fighters because they're getting paid dirt. And with what these fighters are getting offered, it's not necessarily insanely great, and it seems like pennies considering the risk. But when you're in a situation where these fighters are at, where they're busting their lives and thinking they're supposed to be at a peak, you're getting a lot more fame than you are getting fortune as a UFC fighter. And when you're getting a lot more fame than you are fortune, at that point you're starting to realize, at what point is this fame really translating for me? What can I do to make more money for myself? The fortune isn't coming. I need to equate this fame and fortune, or at least close the gap a little bit, bring the fortune towards the fame. I'd love to grow the fame, but I need to grow the fortune because these fighters need to make a living. Being in the UFC is one thing. Getting paid $12,000 and 12 and 12 to make it to the fight and to win the fight, it's not necessarily the most sustainable thing in the world, especially if you get injured, and the UFC isn't paying their bottom end fighters the greatest. So fighters like Vince Morales stated that he was offered $70,000 to throw a fight. Vince Morales just tweeted this. $70,000 offered to throw a fight. He declined it, said he wouldn't be able to live with himself. That's why he's tweeting about it and informing us about it. And he said he still lost the fight nonetheless, but $70,000 to throw a fight. Now, it is pennies, in my opinion, relative to the risk that you can end up suffering. You know, prison, amongst several other things, but I feel like prison is enough of a reason to deter somebody, right? It's enough of a deterrent. But $70,000 to somebody who maybe is on a 1-fight losing streak or a 2-fight losing streak and made $12,000 in each of those last 2 fights and only fought once or twice last year. How much money are these people making throughout the year? I mean, let's say they don't have another job. That's $24,000 if you only fought 2 times the year prior. No performance bonus, no win bonus, $24,000, and you have all the fees you have to pay to the gym, coaches, anything else. That's nothing annually for somebody fighting at the top of a promotion, the top promotion in mixed martial arts, and you're making $24,000 a year. Could work at McDonald's and make more. $70,000 seems pretty enticing for a night. A guaranteed $70,000 seems pretty enticing. And then you get your extra $12,000, that's $82,000 in a night. That's more than triple than you just made last year if you only fought twice and lost both. Why would a fighter who's desperate not take that opportunity? If they can keep it closed, if they can make sure that it doesn't seem too obvious. And a lot of fighters can do it without making it too obvious. How often do you see MMA fans completely brushing by a horrible stoppage, a horrible scorecard, saying it's just excuses, saying stop complaining, or a fighter completely fighting out of the norm of their typical style, or completely fighting out of the norm of their typical behavior, and then all of a sudden you hear about a random injury or some sort of excuse that kind of backs up the performance, and maybe sometimes we even don't. $70,000 on top of like $12,000, pretty enticing. Maybe you only fought 1 time last year and you lost and you got injured. UFC's not going to be paying you to stay out. You're going to have to be working, or you're going to be broke. $70,000 plus that $12,000 you made to lose last year, and then you get the $12,000. So let's say you only fought 1 time last year and you lost and you got injured and you couldn't fight the whole year. You wait a whole year to fight again. You only made $12,000 last year from the UFC. You're not working. You're injured. Then you come back a year later, somebody offers you $70,000 to throw a fight. You get $12,000 from the UFC for your show pay, $70K guaranteed from the person who's offering it. That's $82,000 you made from, if my math is right, like just under 7 times the amount you made last year off of 1 night because you decided to just lose a fight. Probably taking minimal amount of damage as you could, or even just trying to get submitted. Because the easiest way to lose a fight is what Isaac Dulgarian just did, which get rear naked choked. Easy money. Shoot a labor takedown, get sprawled, don't get that takedown. Maybe you're in on the takedown, but you let go a little bit more. Now it looks like the guy defending the takedown is defending it beautifully. Then you give up your back, and all of a sudden he's rear naked choking you. That's the easiest way to get out of one, isn't it? You choke, you tap, you're gone. No damage, no physical damage. You're not getting hurt. No limbs are getting broken. Definitely something to look at. More things that Ariel Helwani pointed out. It was Ben Fox on his show. Some bets for the Isaac Dulgarian versus Ariel Helwani fight came from new accounts and dormant sharp accounts. So all of a sudden, a lot of new accounts being made to add more and more money on this. If you go look at Isaac Dulgarian, he was around like a minus 250 to 260 favorite, and all of a sudden spiked to like minus 150. Just that much money coming in on Ariel Helwani with no backtrack, no money coming in to fight against it on Dulgarian. Unusual betting activity triggered alerts through integrity and monitoring services around 3 p.m. Eastern time. 3 p.m. Eastern time. The fight card started at 4 p.m. Eastern time. The prelims. The main card started at 7. There was time. There was time for the UFC to figure this out. So now the UFC is kind of in a debacle because they were informed. They knew about it. Some sportsbooks closed the betting. Some bets were canceled after the alerts. The sportsbooks are taking action against suspicious activity, closing the betting activity, or even canceling a lot of the bets after these alerts, and the UFC is letting the fight happen, knowing these things are occurring, because apparently they were informed by the FBI, allegedly. How does the UFC get away with this? What does this do to the UFC White House card? Is the UFC White House card in jeopardy all of a sudden? How badly is the UFC going to be reprimanded for this, if they are at all? Or is it just going to be an Isaac Dulgarian thing and parties included? The people that are offering them to fix a fight, how are they reprimanded? How does that come into legal story? Because I didn't dig into what happens legally with those people trying to offer this amount of money to fix a fight. What happens to these people? Who gets it worse? These are important things to know. Also, another thing, according to Ben Fox on the Ariel Helwani show, normally betting on a line stops when value disappears. In this case, all bets kept going one-sided on the underdog, Ariel Helwani, with no significant counter bets. As I was saying earlier, no one was really putting any counter bets on Dulgarian, so it's just a random spike in Dulgarian getting money on, Helwani getting money on him more and more and more and more. I don't know how the UFC is going to get out of this. It's happened multiple times under the UFC banner, and you can't really do anything about it if you are the UFC or the NBA. We saw the NBA deal with it with Terry Rozier just recently. If you watch the NBA, we've had betting scandals in the NBA a couple times now, with Chauncey Billups as well, an NBA coach. And then you've also had multiple situations where now the UFC with James Krause and Jeff Molina, and now you have this this Isaac Dulgarian situation. But this time we're informed the UFC kind of was informed about the suspicious activity and let it go on. Does that make the UFC officially complicit? An accomplice, per se. This is the biggest betting scandal in MMA history, at least publicly notified. And we're about to get big answers on what's going to happen with the UFC. I feel like this could affect the White House card. I feel like this could affect a lot of UFC events coming forward, whether or not the UFC may have to be forced to shut down momentarily. How could this affect upcoming cards in UFC 322, UFC 323? I mean, these are two of the biggest UFC cards we've had ever in back-to-back months. And now we're dealing with this little situation in the UFC Apex. This is all because of a UFC Apex fight, by the way. You think this is on some big stage. No. These fighters, by the way, in my opinion, probably feel a little bit safer doing it in the Apex because they assume less people are watching. It's a garbage card. Not as many people are looking into it. But there's always going to be gamblers on this stuff no matter what. I feel like a lot of the reason that people watch these cards, apart from some diehards, is that they're gambling. And I mean, clearly, you could see with the Dulgarian versus Helwani fight that a lot of people are just straight up gambling on this. And this is the biggest story that comes out of this fight night with Garcia Onami. I mean, Steve Garcia is on a 7-fight win streak. I think 6 of those might be finishes, if I'm not wrong. Just knocked out David Onama, his toughest competition yet, in the first round, 3.5 minutes into the fight, at a main event in the featherweight division, setting up a potential big fight against Gene Silva, another big contender at featherweight. And the biggest story coming out of this is a betting scandal. The magnitude that the UFC is going to have to deal with, especially in the coming days or weeks leading up to this November. I mean, they're going to be asking Dana White about this at the press conferences. And Dana White's going to have to answer to some of these questions now. There's no way Dana White's going to dismiss them completely. He has to give a little bit of an answer, especially at the UFC 322 press conference, media days, etc. We're going to get some answers on it soon, but it's nice to have this information coming out because it magnifies the situation. It shows us how big this situation really is getting, with purses being withheld, with the Nevada State Athletic Commission getting involved, the FBI allegedly getting involved, and Ariel Helwani giving us some more details, Ben Fox coming and giving us details from the sports books. It's all becoming more and more interesting. I want to see what ends up being at jeopardy and how far this really will go. Thank you guys all for watching. That'll be the end of today's episode. I will see you guys tomorrow morning as per usual. Subscribe and like, and make sure you guys leave a comment if you guys have any questions or suggestions for the show. Again, appreciate you guys for watching. See you guys tomorrow. Peace out.